You know that feeling, right? You get invited to some big, loud party, and maybe just a small part of you, or maybe a really big part, just desperately wants to stay home, curl up with a book.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost like there's this unspoken pressure that being outgoing is the default, the right way to be fun.
Exactly. And if you prefer quiet, you feel a bit, I don't know, guilty? Or like you're missing out somehow?
It's such a common thing. So many people feel that societal nudge, that the life of the party is the ideal.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. What if preferring quiet isn't a weakness, but actually a source of hidden strength? The material you shared is fascinating. It really looks at the science behind it all.
Yeah, it offers a fresh perspective. So our mission today is really to unpack the power of introversion. We want to challenge some common myths, look at the research, and offer some real insights for introverts navigating a world that seems, well, pretty loud sometimes.
Okay, let's dive in. When we say introvert and extrovert,
Yeah,
what are we actually talking about? It's definitely more complicated than just shy versus outgoing, isn't it?
absolutely. So the basic idea goes back to Carl Jung. He saw introverts as being drawn more to their inner world, thoughts, feelings, reflections.
Okay.
And extroverts, they're drawn more to the external world, people, activities, what's happening out there.
But the key thing isn't just what they're drawn to, right? It's about energy.
Exactly. That's the crucial difference. Introverts generally recharge their batteries through solitude, quiet time. Extroverts, on the other hand, they actually gain energy from social interaction.
So it's not that introverts dislike people necessarily.
Not at all. That's a really important distinction. Introversion isn't the same as shyness, which is more about the fear of social judgment. An introvert might love a deep conversation with a close friend, but find big crowds draining. And it's definitely not the same as being a hermit or conditions like Asperger's, which are neurologically different. Temperament's complex. It's a spectrum. So,
Yeah.
not everything we talk about will fit every single person who identifies as an introvert.
That makes total sense. It's not a neat little box.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned this societal pressure. The sources call it the extrovert ideal. How did being outgoing become the gold standard, so to
Oh,
speak?
that's a really interesting historical shift. So back in the 19th century, the focus was more on what's called a culture of character.
Character, meaning like integrity, honor.
Precisely. Inner virtues, qualities you didn't necessarily have to shout about. But then in the 20th century, things shifted towards a culture of personality.
Personality,
Yeah.
okay, so more about outward impression.
Exactly. Being magnetic, charming, making a great first impression, suddenly that became highly valued. Think about the rise of sales, marketing, Hollywood. Dale Carnegie's work was huge in promoting this idea of winning friends and influencing people through outward projection.
So it became less about who you were deep down and more about how you performed socially.
Pretty much. And you see remnants of that everywhere today, don't you? Like, think about classroom setups, lots of group work, the assumption being that collaboration is always better.
Yeah, or even kids' TV shows. The main characters are often super bubbly and outgoing.
Right. It sends this subtle message about what's desirable. The sources even mention how self-help books changed from focusing on self-restraint to teaching how to acquire a magnetic personality.
Wow.
And historically, there was real pressure on quiet kids. William White wrote about it in The Organization Man, this mid-century idea that quiet children needed to be fixed, made more sociable, even if they were brilliant academically.
Like that anecdote about Johnny. Just because he liked playing alone, he was seen as not doing well.
Exactly. It was seen as a problem to be solved.
It feels like society was trying to sand down the introverted edges.
Mhm.
But, okay, the really powerful point in the sources is that introverts often succeed because of their nature, not despite it.
This is key. Think about the examples. Rosa Parks, her strength wasn't loud. It was this quiet, unwavering conviction that resonated so powerfully.
Yeah.
Or Eleanor Roosevelt, working alongside the more extroverted FDR. Her influence came from her deep empathy and thoughtful approach. Gandhi, too, his strategy involved quiet determination. Satyagraha, not just loud protest.
And modern examples.
Warren Buffett, Al Gore, known for deep thinking and analysis, not necessarily booming charisma. Winifred Gallagher put it nicely. She said, significant achievements often come from those who stop to consider stimuli instead of just reacting.
It challenges that typical image of a leader, doesn't it? The always-on, charismatic type.
Definitely. And it's
Yeah.
not just famous figures. There's a story about Laura, a junior lawyer, who won a big negotiation by being measured and thoughtful. She didn't raise her voice. She listened. She strategized quietly. It worked.
So it proves you don't always have to be the loudest to be effective. Okay, so is this difference introvert-extrovert? Is it biological, something we're born with?
Well, the science of temperament suggests it's pretty fundamental. Jerome Kagan's research with infants is really groundbreaking here.
Infants. How did he study that?
He looked at how babies reacted to new things, sounds, sights. He found some babies were high reactive, meaning they got quite agitated, cried, thrashed around. Others were low reactive, much calmer.
Okay. And what did that predict?
Here's the surprising part. The high reactive babies were often more likely to grow into quieter, more introspective teenagers.
Really? You'd think the jumpy ones would be more outgoing later.
It seems that early sensitivity might lead to a more cautious, observant approach later on. Kagan also talked about orchid children, highly sensitive kids who thrive in supportive environments but struggle more in harsh ones.
So some people are just wired to be more sensitive to input.
It looks that way. And fMRI studies, like Carl Schwartz's work, add to this. They've found that people identified as introverts often show more activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, when encountering new faces or situations.
So novelty or social stuff literally triggers a stronger internal reaction.
It seems so. It suggests a lower threshold for stimulation, perhaps. It fits with the idea that big parties can feel overwhelming.
Right. And there's the rubber band theory.
Yeah, yes. The idea is we all have a core temperament, like a rubber band. We can stretch ourselves, act more extroverted or maybe more introverted if needed, but we can only stretch so far before we snap back to our natural state.
Like Lee Gates versus Bill Clinton.
Exactly. Both successful, both have learned skills outside their natural zone, but their core tendencies are pretty different. And Hans Eysenk's older theory about arousal levels fits too. Maybe introverts just have a higher baseline level of cortical arousal, so they need less external stimulation to feel just right.
The lemon juice test supports that, right? Introverts salivating more.
Yeah, and studies showing they prefer quieter environments for tasks requiring concentration. It all points to a real biological underpinning.
Okay, so if it's fundamental, that really changes how we should think about things like leadership. The typical leader is often pictured as very extroverted.
But the research challenges that. Adam Grant's work is fascinating here. He found introverted leaders can actually be more effective, especially when their employees are proactive and bring ideas.
Okay.
While extroverted leaders, being naturally dominant, might sometimes steamroll over proactive employees or feel threatened by their initiative. Introverted leaders, being better listeners perhaps, are more likely to hear those ideas out and empower their team.
That pizza chain study showed that, didn't it?
Yeah, the stores run by introverts did better financially when the employees were proactive in suggesting improvements.
That completely flips the script on who makes a good leader.
It really does. And Jim Collins' research on great companies, he found they were often led by humble, quiet, level 5 leaders focused on the institution, not larger-than-life personalities. There's also that cautionary tale, the subarctic survival situation exercise. It shows how the loudest voices, the most confident-sounding people can sometimes dominate a group and lead them astray, overriding quieter members who might actually have better insights.
It makes you think how many good ideas get lost because the person isn't pushy enough. Which leads us to some myths, like the idea that people who talk more are smarter.
Yeah, that's a big one. But research in leaderless groups doesn't really back that up. Talking a lot doesn't necessarily correlate with perceived intelligence or actual good ideas. Sometimes less is more.
And what about brainstorming? The idea that putting everyone in a room together is the best way to innovate.
Another common belief, but again, the evidence is mixed. Often individuals working alone first, then coming together, produces better results. People can feel inhibited in groups or latch onto the first few ideas.
Like social pressure.
Exactly. And online collaboration works well too, right? That's often done in relative solitude, allowing for reflection.
Right, and there's that study about the pain of independence.
Byrne's fMRI study, yes. It showed brain activity similar to experiencing pain when people disagreed with a group consensus, even if the group was clearly wrong. It highlights how strong that pressure to conform is, neurologically even.
Wow. Okay, so given these pressures and myths, how can introverts not just survive, but actually thrive in environments often geared towards extroverts?
A really key strategy is finding or creating restorative niches.
Restorative niches, like hiding places.
Sort of. It means consciously carving out time and space for solitude to recharge. This is super important, especially with things like open-plan offices making quiet time harder to find.
That's a huge challenge for many people.
It is. But some companies, like Pixar and Microsoft apparently, are recognizing this and creating more flexible spaces areas for collaboration, but also quiet zones for focused work.
That's good. What else?
There's also the idea of free trade agreements from psychologist Brian Little. It's about consciously deciding to act more extroverted when it's really important for a core personal project, a key presentation, something you deeply care about.
So acting out of character strategically.
Exactly. But, and this is crucial, you have to build in recovery time afterwards. You make an agreement with yourself. I'll push myself for this specific thing, but then I need to retreat and recharge. Otherwise, you risk burnout.
It's about managing your energy wisely.
Precisely. And realizing that introverts and extroverts can actually be great complements to each other in teams and relationships. Thorne's research showed they often appreciate each other's differing styles when they get to know each other.
What about for kids in school? Schools often feel very extrovert-focused.
That's true. It helps if parents and teachers understand this. Encourage introverted kids to find subjects they're passionate about, that passion can be energizing. Help them find roles in group work that fit their strengths, maybe research or writing rather than presenting all the time.
And practice social skills?
Gently, yes. Not forcing them, but giving them tools and confidence. And fundamentally, parents need to respect their child's need for downtime and not push them into constant social activity. Let them engage gradually, comfortably.
It's about support, not fixing. Now, you also mentioned cultural differences, which is fascinating. The extrovert ideal isn't universal.
Not at all. It's quite pronounced in, say, American culture. But many Eastern cultures traditionally place a much higher value on quietness, listening, and contemplation. Silence can be seen as golden, a sign of wisdom.
How does that play out?
Well, studies comparing kids in China and Canada found differences in peer popularity. In Canada, outgoing kids were often more popular. In China, shy, sensitive children were often well-liked, sometimes even seen as leaders because they were perceived as dongxi, understanding, thoughtful.
Wow, completely different values attached to the same traits.
Exactly. And fMRI studies even show different brain responses to dominant versus submissive postures in Americans compared to Japanese individuals, reflecting these ingrained cultural norms.
So our culture really shapes how we see these traits.
Definitely. There's the example of Mike, the student at Stanford, feeling pressure to be more outgoing in that American university setting and finding kinship with other Asian students who are more comfortable with a quieter style. And Professor Nee's class, teaching Asian professionals how to project more charisma for American business, that highlights the practical impact.
It really drives home how subjective these ideals can be. Okay, so wrapping this all up, what's the main takeaway, especially for listeners who identify as introverts?
I think the biggest message is empowerment and self-acceptance. There's no single best personality. Evolution favors diversity. Think of the bold versus shy fish, each thriving in different conditions. Introverts have incredible strengths, deep focus, careful listening, unique perspectives.
Strengths that are often undervalued.
Exactly, but they are strengths. Like Tiffany, who became editor-in-chief by leveraging her quiet skills, listening, researching thoroughly. And sometimes that introverted caution is hugely valuable. Think about finance. The sources mention investors like Klarman or Burry, whose success came from being contrarian, analytical, risk-averse, not following the herd.
So traits sometimes seen negatively can be real assets.
Absolutely. The key is to understand your own nature and honor it. If you prefer depth over breadth, quiet over noise, single tasking over multitasking, that's okay. That's more than okay. It's powerful. Being less swayed by constant external rewards can be a source of real independence.
Stay true to your own nature. That's a great message. So maybe the final thought for everyone listening is this. In a world that seems to reward the loudest voice, what are we missing? What insights, what kinds of leadership, what potential gets overlooked when we don't value the power of quiet? Something to think about, definitely.